In the 41st millennium, the laws of physics are merely suggestions, and faith reshapes reality itself. But what happens when something from beyond the veil of stars arrives with its own immutable laws? When hellfire meets the warp, when vengeance incarnate collides with a galaxy drowning in sin, the question isn't whether damnation will follow, it's whether anyone will survive to witness it. The sky above Hive Tertius broke open like a wound. It wasn't the familiar crimson tear of a warp rift, nor the sickly green gash that heralded chaos incursion. This rupture burned with colors that had no name, flames that existed in dimensions the human eye was never meant to perceive. The cogitators in the planetary defense station shrieked their machine spirits into madness. Augur arrays melted. Servitors began speaking in tongues that predated old night. Then something fell. It wasn't a drop pod. It wasn't a meteor. It was a man, or the burning shell of what had once been a man, trailing hellfire that scorched the air itself. The impact crater carved into the Underhive's industrial sector measured 30 meters across. Molten rockcrete cooled at its edges. The few gangers and factory serfs who witnessed the landing couldn't describe what they'd seen. 3 went catatonic. 5 clawed their own eyes out. 1 simply laughed until his lungs collapsed. When the flames subsided enough for human eyes to bear, the figure stood. The skull was wrapped in fire that shouldn't exist, flames that burned without fuel, without heat transfer, without obeying the fundamental laws that even the warp grudgingly acknowledged. Leather blackened by eons of damnation hung from a frame that radiated power older than mankind's fall. In one skeletal hand, a chain uncoiled, each link etched with symbols that made reality flinch. Where his feet touched ground, the rockcrete didn't melt. It simply ceased to be, replaced by something that resembled scorched bone. Johnny Blaze, or what remained of the man beneath the spirit of vengeance, surveyed his new hell. The Underhive sprawled before him like a mechanical cancer. Towers of rust and desperation climbed toward a sky choked with industrial smog. Millions of souls pressed together in darkness, their suffering a constant hymn. The air tasted of promethium, blood, and hopelessness. Somewhere in the distance, servitor priests chanted binary prayers to the machine god. Closer, he heard screaming. Always screaming. But something was wrong. The hellfire flickered. For the first time in centuries, the flames that defined his existence wavered like candles in a storm. The spirit of vengeance recoiled within him, confused, disoriented. This place, this entire reality, operated on rules that clashed with hell's fundamental architecture. There was another presence here, vast and suffocating, that pushed back against his divine retribution, not opposing it exactly, interfering with it. The warp. He didn't know the word yet, but he felt it, an ocean of souls and nightmares pressing against reality's skin, and layered over that something else, a psychic scream of faith so powerful it rewrote physics. Trillions of minds believing, praying, dying in the name of something called the Emperor. Ghost Rider's skull turned toward the sky. Somewhere up there, beyond the smog and orbital platforms, he felt it. A presence, dead but undying. A corpse that commanded galaxies. Faith made manifest in a way that even the spirit of vengeance found unsettling. Halt! By the authority of the God Emperor's Holy Inquisition, identify yourself. The voice crackled through Vox speakers mounted on armored personnel carriers that had surrounded the crater. 20 vehicles, 40 heavy bolters, 200 Imperial Guard soldiers in flak armor, laser guns raised with trembling hands. Above them, gunships hovered like mechanical vultures. A figure emerged from the lead Chimera transport. Inquisitor Matthias Cove was a man who'd seen demons wearing human skin. He'd witnessed worlds burn at his command. He'd looked into the warp and kept his sanity through sheer willpower and absolute faith. But what stood in that crater made him pause. In the name of the Emperor, you will submit to questioning or be destroyed as a threat to the Imperium of man. Ghost Rider's skull tilted. The hellfire in his eyes pulsed, once, twice. Then he spoke, and his voice was the sound of judgment itself. Guilty. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Inquisitor Cove's augmentic eye whirred, analyzing threat levels. His psychic hood detected something. Not the warp, not chaos corruption, something else entirely. Something that read as both holy and damned simultaneously, a paradox that shouldn't exist. Explain yourself, abomination. What are you? Demon? Xenos construct? Some new horror birthed from the warp? The spirit of vengeance processed the question. Memories that weren't his own flooded through, fragments of this universe's history leaking through the dimensional breach. He saw the Emperor, the Horus Heresy, 10,000 years of endless war, a galaxy where humanity clung to existence through faith and brutality. And everywhere, on every world, in every action, guilt. Ghost Rider took a step forward. The ground beneath him turned to ash. I am vengeance. I am judgment. I am the spirit that punishes the wicked. The only judgment comes from him on Terra. Cove raised his hand, and bolt rounds filled the air. The explosive shells passed through flames and impacted bone. They detonated. For 3 seconds, the crater disappeared in fire and shrapnel. The guardsmen held their breath. When the smoke cleared, Ghost Rider stood unchanged. Your weapons mean nothing, but your sins? The hellfire in his eyes brightened. Your sins burn eternal. Cove felt it then, the weight of every order given, every innocent sacrificed for the greater good, every planet condemned to save 10 others. The spirit of vengeance was reading him, measuring him, preparing to deliver judgment. Fire everything! Cove's voice cracked. Throne of Terra! Kill it! The underhive erupted in violence. Heavy bolters roared. Laze fire turned night to day. Gunships unleashed their payload. The crater became a kill zone that would have vaporized a space marine. Ghost Rider walked through it all. His chain lashed out, wrapping around the nearest Chimera. With strength that defied the weakened hellfire, he pulled. The 30-ton vehicle flipped like a toy. Guardsmen scattered. Some fired point blank. Others ran. A few fell to their knees in prayer, convinced they were witnessing either the Emperor's wrath or demonic manifestation. Cove's psychic hood flared. He reached into the warp, drawing power, preparing a psychic assault that would reduce a lesser demon to screaming essence. Their eyes met. The penance stare activated. For Inquisitor Matthias Cove, time stopped. He felt every life he'd taken, every order given, every compromise made in the Emperor's name. He experienced the fear of the girl he'd executed for witchcraft. She'd been 9 years old and guilty only of making flowers bloom. He felt the agony of the billion souls on Kratos 6 when he ordered exterminatus. He lived through the torture sessions, the interrogations, the necessary evils. All of it, at once, forever. He screamed. Blood ran from his eyes, his nose, his ears. His psychic hood overloaded, sparks fountaining from its circuits. He collapsed, convulsing, his mind trying to process the impossible weight of his own actions. But he didn't die. The penance stare, weakened by this universe's strange rules, couldn't quite finish the job. It showed him his sins, but couldn't deliver full judgment. Ghost Rider felt the resistance, the way the warp and the Emperor's presence disrupted his power. He released Cove, letting the Inquisitor fall. The remaining guardsmen had stopped firing. They stared at their commander, broken and sobbing on the ground. They stared at the burning skeleton who'd done the impossible, brought an Inquisitor to his knees without violence. Ghost Rider looked at them all. Soldiers following orders, men trying to survive, some guilty of atrocities, some simply trying to protect their homes. In his own world, judgment was clear. Good and evil, sin and innocence. Here, in this dark millennium, the lines were ash. "Tell your Emperor," Ghost Rider's voice carried across the crater, "that vengeance has come to his galaxy, and it answers to no throne." He turned away from the soldiers, from the broken Inquisitor, from the underhive that stretched endlessly in all directions. The Hellfire motorcycle materialized beneath him, chrome and flame given form. It roared with a sound that predated combustion engines, a primal scream of judgment. As he rode into the depths of Hive Tertius, alarms began to sound across the planet. Astropaths screamed messages to nearby worlds. The Inquisition mobilized. And in the warp, things that called themselves gods took notice of the spirit that refused to kneel. Ghost Rider descended deeper into Hive Tertius, where the Emperor's light had never reached and never would. The underhive sprawled like a diseased organ, kilometers of corroded infrastructure held together by desperation and rust. Neon flickered in puddles of chemical runoff. Gangers marked territory with corpses. Mutants huddled in alcoves, their twisted forms the result of generations breathing toxic air. The Hellfire motorcycle carved through it all, leaving trails of flame that burned away centuries of grime. He could feel them, the guilty. They radiated like beacons in the darkness. A flesh trader dragging children toward the slave markets. A cult leader preparing sacrifices to something that whispered from beyond reality. Enforcers executing families for missing factory quotas. The underhive was a symphony of sin, and every note screamed for judgment. But something else caught his attention. In a hab block that had collapsed decades ago, buried under 3 levels of industrial waste, he felt it. Innocence. Real, genuine innocence. A sensation so rare in this universe, it felt like a knife wound. Ghost Rider stopped. The motorcycle's engine growled, flames pulsing with uncertainty. The spirit of vengeance had spent eons punishing the wicked, but it was designed, created, to protect the innocent. And here, impossibly, was someone who didn't deserve damnation. He dismounted and walked toward the collapsed structure. His skeletal hand reached out, and hellfire, still flickering, still weakened, carved through debris like paper. Rockcrete and steel parted. 3 levels of compressed ruin peeled away. Inside, huddled in a pocket of air that should have crushed her hours ago, was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 7. Malnutrition had made her skeletal. Chemical burns marked her arms. Her clothes were rags held together with wire. But her eyes were clear. Terrified, but clear. She looked at the burning skull and didn't scream. "Are you an angel?" Her voice was barely a whisper, shaped by a dialect that predated Imperial Gothic. "Mama said angels come when you die. Am I dead?" Ghost Rider knelt. The hellfire dimmed, pulling back into the skull until only embers remained in his eye sockets. The spirit of vengeance, ancient instrument of divine retribution, found itself at a loss. Angels. She thought he was an angel. In his own world, he'd been called many things. Demon, monster, spirit of vengeance, never angel. "No," he said, and his voice was softer now, though still edged with that otherworldly rasp. "You're alive." "But the building fell. Papa was angry. He said I cost him credits. He pushed the support beam and—" She stopped, realizing what she'd admitted. In the Underhive, family murder was common enough to warrant barely a shrug from local enforcers. Ghost Rider's flames brightened. Somewhere in the hab blocks above, a man was going about his day, believing his daughter buried and forgotten. The spirit of vengeance marked him. Judgment would come. "What's your name?" "Sarah. Sarah Thelms." She looked at her burned arms. "I tried to work faster. I tried. But the machines are big, and my hands are small, and—" "You did nothing wrong." The word surprised him. When was the last time he'd said that to anyone? Centuries? Millennia? "Can you walk?" Sarah nodded, though her legs trembled when she stood. Ghost Rider reached out a skeletal hand. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. The bone was warm, not burning, but warm, like a campfire in winter. He led her out of the collapsed building, back toward the levels where light still existed. The motorcycle followed, engine purring, hellfire contained to faint wisps. They climbed through access shafts and maintenance tunnels, away from the deepest darkness. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked. Good question. Where did innocence go in a galaxy that devoured it? The spirit of vengeance processed what he'd learned through the dimensional breach. Orphanages were slave markets in waiting. Churches preached death before dishonor. Even the emperor's own servants killed children to prevent potential corruption. Where did vengeance fit when everyone deserved punishment? "I'll find a way." Ghost Rider turned away from Korn's presence. "I always do." The presence faded, but Ghost Rider felt it watching. Korn wasn't the only one. The other three powers observed him with varying degrees of interest.
He was an anomaly, a piece that didn't fit their game. That made him either a threat or a tool. He refused to be either. Ghost Rider mounted his motorcycle and rode back into the Underhive's depths. The spirit of vengeance needed to understand this universe better, needed to find the truly guilty among the merely desperate, needed to learn if justice could exist in a place where innocence died the moment you were born. Behind him, in the chapel, Sarah knelt before the statue of the Emperor and prayed. She thanked him for sending an angel with a burning skull. She asked him to protect the spirit who'd saved her life. And somewhere on distant Terra, entombed in the golden throne, a corpse god flickered with something that might have been awareness. The Emperor felt the prayer, felt the child's faith, felt the presence of something that existed outside his plans, outside the great game, outside everything he'd calculated across 10,000 years. For the first time in millennia, the Emperor wondered if he'd miscalculated.
The next 3 cycles brought Ghost Rider face to face with the true scope of the 41st millennium's damnation. He found a manufactorum where workers were chained to assembly lines, producing bolt rounds until their fingers bled and their minds broke. The overseers claimed it was necessary. The war effort demanded production, and the Emperor's will was absolute. Ghost Rider judged them anyway. Their screams echoed through the factory as the penance stare showed them every worker they'd beaten, every child they'd worked to death. The flames were still inconsistent, flickering between full power and weakness, but judgment found its mark. He discovered a pleasure cult in the mid-hive, servants of something the locals called Slanesh. They'd turned an entire hab block into a nightmare of sensation and excess. Ghost Rider burned through them methodically, but even as they died, they laughed. They welcomed damnation. They'd already given themselves to something worse than hell. And everywhere, he found chaos. It wasn't like the demons he'd faced in his own world. Those were straightforward, evil wearing evil's face. But chaos was insidious. It promised freedom to the enslaved, knowledge to the ignorant, vitality to the sick, glory to the forgotten. It corrupted by offering exactly what people needed most, then twisting that need into damnation. The spirit of vengeance couldn't burn something that looked like salvation to its victims. On the 4th cycle, the Inquisition returned in force. Ghost Rider was in the lower mid-hive, tracking a cult leader who'd sacrificed 17 children to summon a warp entity when the sky lit up with drop pods. Not the crude Imperial Guard models from before. These were obsidian black, marked with the inquisitorial eye and radiating an aura of absolute authority. 20 Astartes emerged. They weren't standard space marines. These wore black armor inscribed with wards and purity seals. Death Watch, the chamber militant of the Ordo Xenos, though they served other Ordos when needed. Each one was a veteran from a different chapter, chosen for their skill at killing things that shouldn't exist. Their leader was massive even by Astartes standards. His armor bore the heraldry of the Black Templars, a chapter known for their zealous hatred of anything that smelled of witchcraft or corruption. "Halt, entity!" The Templar's voice boomed through vox speakers.
You stand accused of assaulting an inquisitor, unauthorized judgment of imperial citizens, and existence outside the Emperor's divine order. Surrender or be destroyed." Ghost Rider stopped. The Hellfire motorcycle idled beneath him, flames casting dancing shadows across the Astartes' armor. He studied them. Gene-enhanced warriors, each one capable of killing hundreds of normal men. Their weapons were works of art and destruction. Storm bolters that could shred tanks, power weapons that disrupted molecular bonds, faith made manifest in steel and ceramite. But they were still men, and men could be guilty. "Move aside," Ghost Rider said. "My business isn't with you. Your business is whatever the Inquisition declares it to be." The Templar raised his power sword. "You will submit to interrogation and judgment." "I don't submit." Ghost Rider's chain uncoiled, each link burning with hellfire that finally seemed to stabilize. The warp's interference was lessening. Either he was adapting, or the spirit of vengeance was learning to work within this universe's strange rules. "And I'm the one who judges." Heresy. The word carried the weight of 10,000 years of faith. Only the Emperor judges. Only he determines guilt and innocence. Ghost Rider looked at the Templar, and through the Astartes helmet he saw the man within. Decades of warfare, millions of enemies killed, and beneath it all, genuine, unshakable faith. This warrior believed with every fiber of his enhanced being that he served righteousness. But the penance stare didn't care about faith. "You want to see judgment?" Ghost Rider's skull tilted. "Let me show you what you've done." The Templar charged. Superhuman speed carried him forward in a blur. His power sword came down with enough force to split a tank. Ghost Rider caught it, bare bone gripping blessed steel. The blade screamed as contradictory energies collided. Holy, infernal, divine, damned. The sword didn't know what to do with something that was all and none of these things. Their eyes met. The penance stare activated. Brother Captain Mordrin of the Black Templars experienced every kill. Every Xenos purged, every heretic burned, every world cleansed. The justified executions and the mistakes. The civilians caught in orbital bombardments. The children killed because their parents consorted with chaos. The refugees gunned down because they might be corrupted. 40 years of righteous slaughter. But Mordrin didn't break like Inquisitor Cove had. His faith was too strong, his conviction too absolute. He saw his sins and accepted them. "I regret nothing." Each word was agony, but he forced them out. They were necessary. "The Emperor judges me, not you." Ghost Rider released him, surprised. The Templar fell to one knee, blood leaking from his helmet's eye lenses, but he was still conscious, still defiant. "You're strong," Ghost Rider acknowledged, "but strength doesn't make you right. Neither does your power." Mordrin struggled to his feet, power sword still burning in his grip. "You claim to judge the guilty, but by what standard? Your own? That's not justice. That's tyranny." The words hit harder than any weapon could. Ghost Rider had spent eons punishing the wicked, but always by hell's laws, by ancient contracts between heaven and damnation. Here, those rules didn't apply. Here, he was judge, jury, and executioner, with no higher authority to answer to. Was he any better than the Imperium he'd been condemning? The other Deathwatch Marines opened fire. Bolt rounds filled the air, mass reactive shells designed to penetrate armor and detonate inside the target. Ghost Rider's chain whipped out, deflecting some, but others found their mark. They exploded against bone and leather, tearing chunks from his form. For the first time since arriving in this universe, Ghost Rider felt pain. Not much, his regeneration was already knitting the damage, but enough to confirm what he'd suspected. This universe could hurt him. The combination of blessed ammunition, faith-enhanced weapons, and Astartes' precision was enough to damage even the spirit of vengeance. He wasn't invincible here. Fall back, Mordrin ordered his squad. Pattern Omega-7, contain and suppress. The Deathwatch moved with practiced efficiency, spreading out to create a kill box. Their bolters sang in coordinated bursts. One Marine carried a heavy flamer, Blessed Prometheum, that burned with the Emperor's own wrath. Another wielded a plasma cannon, raw stellar fury compressed into weapon form. Ghost Rider mounted his motorcycle and gunned the engine. Hellfire erupted from the exhaust, creating a wall of flame between him and the Marines. He accelerated, smashing through a hab-block wall, using the urban terrain to break line of sight. The Astartes pursued. They were faster than he'd expected. Superhuman physiology pushed to the limit. They kept pace, even as he wove through collapsed buildings and rusted gantries. Their tactical coordination was flawless, one squad herding him toward another, creating intersecting fields of fire. But Ghost Rider had ridden through hell's legions. He'd outrun demons and angels alike. He took a hard turn, the motorcycle defying physics as it rode up a vertical wall. Hellfire traced his path, burning handholds into the rockcrete. He reached a walkway 4 stories up, launched off it, and soared across a gap that should have been impossible to clear. Below, the Deathwatch adjusted. Target is mobile beyond standard parameters, requesting air support. The response came in seconds. Valkyrie gunships screamed overhead, their lace cannons painting the night with ruby death. Ghost Rider swerved, the beams carving molten trenches where he'd been moments before. One struck his rear tire. The Hellfire construct exploded, then reformed, but the impact sent him into a spin. He crashed through a market stall, scattering counterfeit relics and bootleg ammunition. Vendors scattered, civilians dove for cover. The Deathwatch were closing in from 3 directions. And then, the world went red. Not blood red, brass red, the color of rage given form. A Chaos Space Marine materialized in the center of the marketplace. 8 feet of corrupted ceramite and demonic mutation. His armor bore the symbol of corn, 8 points radiating from a central skull. Blood dripped from his armor's seams, never drying, never clotting. The air around him shimmered with barely contained violence. Blood for the Blood God! The Chaos Marine's roar was inhuman. He charged the nearest Deathwatch team, chain axe screaming. The Imperium's warriors turned to face this new threat. Bolt rounds and blessed blades met corrupted armor. The Chaos Marine laughed as he killed, each death feeding the entity he served. More cultists emerged from the shadows, dozens of them, bearing crude weapons and shouting prayers to their dark god. The marketplace became a war zone. Imperial, chaos, civilian, all mixed in a confused melee of desperation and violence. Ghost Rider watched it unfold. This was what this universe was. Constant war, endless bloodshed, everyone killing everyone for reasons that had long since stopped mattering. The Chaos Marine noticed him. "You, Spirit, Khorne has marked you. Join us or die." "I already gave my answer." Ghost Rider's hellfire surged, finally burning at something close to full strength. The warp and hell had found equilibrium, his power no longer fighting against this universe, but learning to exist within it. He rode straight at the Chaos Marine. His chain lashed out, wrapping around the corrupted warrior's throat. The Marine tried to cut it, chain axe against mystical chain, but the links held. Ghost Rider pulled, dragging the Chaos Marine off balance, then drove his fist through the warrior's helmet. Bone met corruption. The penance stare activated. For a servant of Khorne, guilt meant nothing. The Chaos Marine had embraced his sins, celebrated them, offered them as praise to his god. The stare should have been useless. But Ghost Rider wasn't showing him his own sins. He showed the Chaos Marine his victims. Every innocent killed, every child murdered, every moment of peace destroyed, not from the killer's perspective, from theirs. The fear, the pain, the desperate final prayers to the Emperor as the axe fell. The Chaos Marine screamed, not in worship, in something that might have been remorse. Khorne felt it. The blood god's attention focused on this marketplace, on this spirit who'd done the impossible, made one of his champions feel regret. Enough! The word wasn't spoken. It was imposed. Reality shuddered as Khorne's will pressed down on the Imperium. Blood boiled in veins. Weapons grew hot enough to burn their wielders. The sky turned crimson. A rift opened. A proper warp tear this time, bleeding unreality into real space. Demons began to pour through. Blood letters, lesser manifestations of Khorne's rage. They charged mindlessly toward the nearest living things. The Death Watch fell back into defensive formation. Warp breach, pattern sanctus, purge protocols. Ghost Rider released the Chaos Marine and turned toward the rift. Demons. He understood demons. They were evil given form, corruption made manifest. No moral ambiguity, no questions about who deserved judgment. Just things that needed to burn. He rode straight into the demon horde. Hellfire met warp spawn in an explosion of contradictory realities. Ghost Rider's chain tore through blood letters like paper. Each demon that touched his flames didn't just die, it unraveled, its essence scattered across dimensions it couldn't comprehend. These were creatures born from the warp, sustained by emotion and belief.
The spirit of vengeance was something else entirely, something that existed outside their cosmic rules. Where they collided, reality screamed. The Death Watch had stopped firing. Brother Captain Mordrin stood frozen, watching the burning skeleton carve through demons with impossible efficiency. His tactical display struggled to process what it was seeing. The entity registered as neither chaos nor sanctioned Imperial asset. It simply was. "Emperor's throne," one of the Marines whispered. "What is he?" "Heresy," Mordrin said automatically, but his voice lacked conviction. He'd spent decades fighting chaos. He knew corruption when he saw it. And whatever this spirit was, it wasn't corrupted. It was something chaos actively feared. The warp rift pulsed, expanding. More demons poured through, but so did something else. A pressure, a presence. Khorne himself, pushing against reality's skin, trying to force more of himself through the breach. "You deny me," the blood god's voice thundered through every mind in the marketplace. Cultists and Marines alike fell to their knees, bleeding from their ears. "You fight my servants. You reject my gifts. But you are rage. You are vengeance. You are mine, whether you accept it or not." Ghost Rider stood at the rift's edge, staring into the bleeding madness of Khorne's domain. He could see it, an ocean of blood and brass, a realm where war was eternal and suffering was currency. Billions of souls screaming, fighting, killing for all eternity. "I've seen hell," Ghost Rider said. "This isn't it. This is just sad." Khorne's roar shook the hive spire to its foundations. Demons materialized faster, a tide of claws and rage. They crashed against Ghost Rider like waves against stone. His hellfire burned brighter than it had since arriving in this universe. The spirit of vengeance finally understanding how to exist here, not by fighting the warp, but by existing as its opposite. Order to chaos, justice to rage, purpose to mindless violence. But even as he fought, Ghost Rider felt it. The rift was spreading. Soon it would consume the entire marketplace, then the sector, then the hive. Millions of souls damned because Khorne wanted one spirit who refused to kneel. He couldn't close it. His power was judgment, not sealing. He could burn demons all day, but the rift itself was beyond him. Where they collided, reality screamed. The Death Watch had stopped firing. Brother Captain Mordrin stood frozen, watching the burning skeleton carve through demons with impossible efficiency. His tactical display struggled to process what it was seeing. The entity registered as neither chaos nor sanctioned Imperial asset. It simply was. "Emperor's throne," one of the Marines whispered. "What is he?" "Heresy," Mordrin said automatically, but his voice lacked conviction. He'd spent decades fighting chaos. He knew corruption when he saw it. And whatever this spirit was,
It wasn't corrupted. It was something chaos actively feared. The warp rift pulsed, expanding. More demons poured through, but so did something else. A pressure, a presence. Khorne himself, pushing against reality's skin, trying to force more of himself through the breach. "You deny me," the blood god's voice thundered through every mind in the marketplace. Cultists and Marines alike fell to their knees, bleeding from their ears. "You fight my servants. You reject my gifts. But you are rage. You are vengeance. You are mine, whether you accept it or not." Ghost Rider stood at the rift's edge, staring into the bleeding madness of Khorne's domain. He could see it, an ocean of blood and brass, a realm where war was eternal and suffering was currency. Billions of souls screaming, fighting, killing for all eternity. "I've seen hell," Ghost Rider said. "This isn't it. This is just sad." Khorne's roar shook the hive spire to its foundations. Demons materialized faster, a tide of claws and rage. They crashed against Ghost Rider like waves against stone. His hellfire burned brighter than it had since arriving in this universe. The spirit of vengeance finally understanding how to exist here, not by fighting the warp, but by existing as its opposite. Order to chaos, justice to rage, purpose to mindless violence. But even as he fought, Ghost Rider felt it. The rift was spreading. Soon it would consume the entire marketplace, then the sector, then the hive. Millions of souls damned because Khorne wanted one spirit who refused to kneel. He couldn't close it. His power was judgment, not sealing. He could burn demons all day, but the rift itself was beyond him. Where they collided, reality screamed. The Death Watch had stopped firing. Brother Captain Mordrin stood frozen, watching the burning skeleton carve through demons with impossible efficiency. His tactical display struggled to process what it was seeing. The entity registered as neither chaos nor sanctioned Imperial asset. It simply was. "Emperor's throne," one of the Marines whispered. "What is he?" "Heresy," Mordrin said automatically, but his voice lacked conviction. He'd spent decades fighting chaos. He knew corruption when he saw it. And whatever this spirit was, it wasn't corrupted. It was something chaos actively feared. The warp rift pulsed, expanding. More demons poured through, but so did something else. A pressure, a presence. Khorne himself, pushing against reality's skin, trying to force more of himself through the breach. "You deny me," the blood god's voice thundered through every mind in the marketplace. Cultists and Marines alike fell to their knees, bleeding from their ears. "You fight my servants. You reject my gifts. But you are rage. You are vengeance. You are mine, whether you accept it or not." Ghost Rider stood at the rift's edge, staring into the bleeding madness of Khorne's domain. He could see it, an ocean of blood and brass, a realm where war was eternal and suffering was currency. Billions of souls screaming, fighting, killing for all eternity. "I've seen hell," Ghost Rider said. "This is just sad." Khorne's roar shook the hive spire to its foundations. Demons materialized faster, a tide of claws and rage. They crashed against Ghost Rider like waves against stone. His hellfire burned brighter than it had since arriving in this universe. The spirit of vengeance finally understanding how to exist here, not by fighting the warp.
He couldn't close it. His power was judgment, not sealing. He could burn demons all day, but the rift itself was beyond him. "Spirit!" Mordrin's voice cut through the demon shrieks. The Templar had recovered, faith burning away the psychic assault. "If you're not with chaos, then help us close that breach." Ghost Rider looked at the Marine, the same warrior who'd tried to kill him minutes ago, the same warrior whose sins he'd shown him. "You still think I'm a threat?" "I think you're an unknown," Mordrin corrected, "but chaos is a known evil. Enemy of my enemy, Spirit. Will you fight beside the Emperor's chosen, or watch this hive burn?" The choice crystallized in that moment. Ghost Rider could walk away. Let the Imperium and chaos tear each other apart. Judge them both guilty and let damnation sort it out. Or he could do what the spirit of vengeance was created to do: protect the innocent from evil. Even in a galaxy where innocence barely existed. "Tell me how to close it." Mordrin's helmet turned toward the rift. "We need a psyker to reverse the ritual, but our librarian is 3 sectors away. By the time he arrives, then I'll buy you time." Ghost Rider revved his motorcycle. "Get your psyker here. I'll hold the line." He didn't wait for a response. The motorcycle launched forward, straight into the warp rift itself. The transition was agony. Reality peeled away. The warp pressed in from all sides. Emotions made manifest. Thoughts given form. Madness wearing existence like a costume. Ghost Rider felt himself coming apart, the spirit of vengeance struggling to maintain cohesion in a realm where physical laws were suggestions. But he was born in hell. He'd ridden through dimensions that shouldn't exist, and the warp, for all its horror, was just another hell wearing different colors. His hellfire expanded, creating a bubble of order in the chaos. Inside that bubble, physics worked. Matter stayed matter. Cause preceded effect. It wasn't much, maybe 10 meters in diameter, but it was enough. Demons crashed against it and burned. Khorne noticed. "Impossible. You exist in my realm. You breathe my air. You stand in my domain. You should be mine. I belong to no one." Ghost Rider's voice echoed through the warp, and for the first time, something answered back. Not Khorne. Something else. Something that had been watching since he arrived in this universe. The Empire. Not the man, the god. 10,000 years of faith and sacrifice had transformed the corpse on Terra into something that existed partially in the warp itself. And that presence recognized Ghost Rider now, saw him not as threat or tool, but as parallel. They were alike, the Emperor and the Spirit.
Both were instruments of judgment. Both burned the guilty. Both claimed to protect humanity from itself. The difference was scope. The Emperor judged worlds. Ghost Rider judged individuals. A fragment of the Emperor's consciousness touched the spirit of vengeance, and in that contact, Ghost Rider saw Terra, the golden throne, the endless screaming of a god trapped in dying flesh, the weight of an empire sustained by faith and sacrifice. The impossible calculations. How many billions must die today so trillions might live tomorrow? He saw the Emperor's sins, all of them. 10,000 years of necessary evils, pragmatic atrocities, calculated genocides. Every decision made for the greater good. Every world burned to save 10 others. Every child sacrificed to stop chaos. Every freedom destroyed to preserve survival. The penance stare activated automatically. And the Emperor, impossible as it seemed, flinched. Not in guilt. The Emperor had moved beyond guilt millennia ago. But in recognition. This spirit understood the burden of judgment, understood what it cost to decide who deserved life and who deserved death. They were not enemies. They were tragic mirrors. The Emperor's presence withdrew, but not before offering something. Knowledge. How to close the rift. Not through psychic power, but through rejection. The warp existed because reality was weak here, diluted by suffering and faith. But Ghost Rider's hellfire was absolute. It doesn't bend to local rules. It exists on its own terms. If he pushed hard enough, he could burn the rift shut. The cost would be immense. The hellfire would consume itself, leaving Ghost Rider vulnerable, possibly powerless, until it recovered. In this universe where everything wanted to kill him, that meant death. But millions of souls hung in the balance. Damn it. Ghost Rider revved the motorcycle one final time. I really hate this galaxy. He released the Hellfire's restraints. Every barrier he'd placed since arriving in the 41st millennium, every limiter designed to conserve power, gone. The flames erupted, consuming everything. Demons, warp energy, reality itself. The bubble of order expanded to 100 meters, then 1,000, then more. Khorne roared in fury. You dare! I've judged gods before. Ghost Rider's voice was fading, the power drain already affecting him. You're just another tyrant wearing divinity badly. The hellfire reached the rift's edges and began to burn them closed. The warp resisted, reality screamed, but inch by inch the breach sealed. Demons on the material side were cut off, left stranded and vulnerable. The Death Watch purged them with ruthless efficiency. In the warp, Khorne reached for Ghost Rider one last time. This isn't over, Spirit. You'll kneel eventually. They all do. Not today. The rift snapped shut. Ghost Rider was ejected back into reality, crashing through 3 hab blocks before his motorcycle finally stopped. The hellfire was gone. His skull was just bone now. No flames, no power. The spirit of vengeance had gone dormant, exhausted beyond measure. Johnny Blaze, the man beneath the curse, reasserted himself for the first time since arriving in this universe. He felt cold, vulnerable, human. Footsteps approached, heavy ceramite on rockcrete. The Death Watch had found him. Mordrin stood over him, power sword still active, still ready. The other Marines formed a perimeter, weapons trained. One command, and they'd execute him. End the threat. Ensure the Emperor's peace. You saved millions, Mordrin said finally. By your actions, countless souls were spared demonic possession. Johnny waited for the but. But you are still an unknown in the Emperor's galaxy, an uncontrolled power that answers to no authority. Mordrin's sword hummed. I should kill you. It would be the safe choice. Then do it. Johnny was too tired to care. I've died before. It never sticks. Mordrin stood over him. Through his helmet's sensors, he could see the entity was powerless now, vulnerable, human almost. This was the moment. Eliminate the threat, while it was weak. His sword lowered. Go, before I change my mind, before other Inquisitors arrive who won't
Hesitate. Mordrin turned away. You bought a debt today, Spirit. The Imperium remembers its debts, for good or ill. Johnny struggled to his feet. His motorcycle was just metal now, no hellfire to sustain it. But it still worked on conventional mechanics. He mounted it, kicked the engine to life, and rode away from the Marines, away from the sealed rift, away from the battlefield. Behind him, Mordrin made his report. He described the entity, the power, the choice to let it live. He knew there would be consequences. The Inquisition didn't forgive mercy. But he'd seen the spirit fight, seen it choose to save millions at cost to itself. That wasn't chaos. That wasn't corruption. That was something the 41st millennium hadn't seen in a very long time. A genuine hero. Johnny Blaze spent the next 6 cycles hiding in the depths of Hive Tertius, waiting for the spirit of vengeance to recover. Without the hellfire, he was just a man, exhausted, confused, and trapped in a universe that wanted him dead. The Underhive sheltered him, ironically. Down here, in the places even the Inquisition rarely reached, he was just another survivor trying to make it through another day. He traded the motorcycle for food and shelter with a tech bang who didn't ask questions. They stripped it for parts, marveling at engineering that made no sense by Mechanicus standards. Johnny slept in a hab cubicle barely large enough to lie down in. He ate fungus paste and protein recaf. He listened to the sounds of the hive, the constant machine drone, the distant screams, the prayers to the Emperor that echoed through ventilation shafts. Millions of voices begging for salvation that would never come. On the 4th cycle, he felt it, a flicker, deep in his chest where the spirit resided. Not much, but enough to know it was recovering. The hellfire was adapting, learning to draw power from this universe's fundamental energies. Not the warp. It rejected chaos instinctively, but something else. The weight of suffering.
the ocean of guilt. Every sin in the hive was fuel, and there were billions. By the 6th cycle, flames danced in his eyes again. Johnny left the hab cubicle and walked the underhive. Not riding, not hunting, just walking, observing, trying to understand the galaxy he'd fallen into. He saw a mother trade her daughter to a flesh merchant for enough food to feed her sons. He saw gangers execute a debtor who couldn't pay protection money. He saw enforcers gun down refugees from a neighboring sector because the hive had reached population capacity. He saw an ecclesiarchy preacher promise the faithful that suffering on Terra meant paradise in death. A lie, Johnny suspected, but one that gave desperate people something to cling to. Every moment was a choice between evils. Every decision was wrong in some way. There was no good option, only degrees of terrible. And yet, people survived. They helped each other when they could. They shared scarce resources. They protected their children, taught them survival, gave them what little hope existed. In the darkest hive of the Imperium's darkest worlds, humanity persisted. Johnny found himself back at the chapel where he'd left Sarah. The priest was still there, older looking somehow, despite only cycles passing. The weight of leadership, perhaps. He was distributing fungus bread to a line of orphans, 43 now, Johnny counted, 6 more than before. Sarah saw him first. She'd been helping the priest, carrying bowls with her burned arms wrapped in clean bandages. When she spotted Johnny, her face lit up with recognition. "Angel!" She ran to him, throwing her small arms around his waist. "You came back!" Johnny knelt to her level. I said, "Maybe." "You saved us. The priest told me about the demon attack. Said an angel closed the rift." She looked at him with absolute faith. "That was you, wasn't it?" Johnny wanted to correct her, tell her he was no angel, that he'd made a pragmatic choice, not a heroic one, that he'd let the rift consume him because the alternative was worse, not because he was good. But looking at her, at all the orphans watching with hungry eyes and desperate hope, he couldn't. "Yeah," he said, "that was me." The priest approached, slower now, leaning on a walking stick he hadn't needed before. The weight of leadership, perhaps. He was distributing fungus bread to a line of orphans. 43 now, Johnny counted, 6 more than before. Sarah saw him first. She'd been helping the priest, carrying bowls with her burned arms wrapped in clean bandages. When she spotted Johnny, her face lit up with recognition. "Angel!" She ran to him, throwing her small arms around his waist. Johnny knelt to her level. I said, "Maybe." "You saved us. The priest told me about the demon attack. Said an angel closed the rift." She looked at him with absolute faith. "That was you, wasn't it?" Johnny wanted to correct her, tell her he was no angel, that he'd made a pragmatic choice, not a heroic one, that he'd let the rift consume him because the alternative was worse, not because he was good. But looking at her, at all the orphans watching with hungry eyes and desperate hope, he couldn't. "Yeah," he said, "that was me." The priest approached, slower now, leaning on a walking stick he hadn't needed before. The weight of leadership, perhaps. He was distributing fungus bread to a line of orphans. 43 now, Johnny counted, 6 more than before. Sarah saw him first. She'd been helping the priest, carrying bowls with her burned arms wrapped in clean bandages. When she spotted Johnny, her face lit up with recognition. "Angel!" She ran to him, throwing her small arms around his waist. Johnny knelt to her level. I said, "Maybe." "You saved us. The priest told me about the demon attack. Said an angel closed the rift." She looked at him with absolute faith. "That was you, wasn't it?" Johnny wanted to correct her, tell her he was no angel, that he'd made a pragmatic choice, not a heroic one, that he'd let the rift consume him because the alternative was worse, not because he was good. But looking at her, at all the orphans watching with hungry eyes and desperate hope, he couldn't. "Yeah," he said, "that was me." The priest approached, slower now, leaning on a walking stick he hadn't needed before. The weight of leadership, perhaps. He was distributing fungus bread to a line of orphans. 43 now, Johnny counted, 6 more than before. Sarah saw him first. She'd been helping the priest, carrying bowls with her burned arms wrapped in clean bandages. When she spotted Johnny, her face lit up with recognition. "Angel!" She ran to him, throwing her small arms around his waist. Johnny knelt to her level. I said, "Maybe." "You saved us. The priest told me about the demon attack. Said an angel closed the rift." She looked at him with absolute faith. "That was you, wasn't it?" Johnny wanted to correct her, tell her he was no angel, that he'd made a pragmatic choice, not a heroic one, that he'd let the rift consume him because the alternative was worse, not because he was good. But looking at her, at all the orphans watching with hungry eyes and desperate hope, he couldn't. "Yeah," he said, "that was me." The priest approached, slower now, leaning on a walking stick he hadn't needed before. The weight of leadership, perhaps. He was distributing fungus bread to a line of orphans. 43 now, Johnny counted, 6 more than before. Sarah saw him first. She'd been helping the priest, carrying bowls with her burned arms wrapped in clean bandages. When she spotted Johnny, her face lit up with recognition. "Angel!" She ran to him, throwing her small arms around his waist. Johnny knelt to her level. I said, "Maybe." "You saved us. The priest told me about the demon attack. Said an angel closed the rift." She looked at him with absolute faith. "That was you, wasn't it?" Johnny wanted to correct her, tell her he was no angel, that he'd made a pragmatic choice, not a heroic one, that he'd let the rift consume him because the alternative was worse, not because he was good. But looking at her, at all the orphans watching with hungry eyes and desperate hope, he couldn't. "Yeah," he said, "that was me." The priest approached, slower now, leaning on a walking stick he hadn't needed before. The weight.
"Spirit, I didn't expect you to return." "Neither did I." Johnny stood. "The girl, is she safe?" "As safe as anyone in this hive. She works hard, complains little. The Emperor blessed us the day you brought her here." The priest paused. "I hear the Inquisition searches for you. They want to classify you, decide if you're useful or dangerous. And if they decide dangerous, exterminate us, probably. This whole hive, just to ensure you die with it." The priest said it casually, like discussing weather. In the 41st millennium, genocide was policy. Will you run? Johnny considered. He could. Find a way off-world. Disappear into the galaxy's vastness. The Imperium was massive. One entity could hide forever if they were smart. But the spirit of vengeance wasn't built to run. No. The hellfire flickered in his eyes, stronger now. Running means leaving the guilty unpunished. And this galaxy has a lot of guilty. Everyone is guilty here, Spirit. If you judge by absolute standards, you'll burn forever and change nothing. Then I'll burn forever. Johnny turned toward the chapel's exit. But I'll choose who burns with me. He walked out into the underhive. And this time, when the hellfire surged, he let it. The transformation took him. Flesh burning away, skull emerging, leather jacket igniting. The spirit of vengeance returned in full, adapted now to the 41st millennium's unique madness. A new motorcycle materialized beneath him. Not the old one. That was scrap metal in a tech gang's workshop. This was something new, forged from hellfire and imperial scrap and the sheer impossibility of his existence. Chrome and bone and flame. It roared with a sound that made reality flinch. Ghost Rider had a purpose now. Not saving the Imperium. He'd seen too much to believe they deserved salvation. Not serving chaos. They'd proven themselves beyond redemption. But between those extremes, in the cracks of this broken galaxy, there were still innocents. Still people like Sarah, who didn't deserve the hell they'd been born into. He'd protect them, judge those who preyed on them. And if that made him an enemy of everyone, Imperium, Chaos, and Xenos alike, then so be it. The spirit of vengeance had found its place in the 41st millennium. He rode through the underhive, and where he passed, the guilty felt his presence. A gang leader who'd been planning to raid the chapel felt hellfire in his dreams and woke screaming. A corrupt enforcer found his weapons melting in his hands. A cult preparing sacrifices to Nurgle discovered their ritual chamber burned to ash, their priest left alive only to deliver a message. Vengeance walks. The guilty will burn. Word spread. The underhive whispered of an angel with a burning skull. Some called him the Emperor's wrath. Others said he was a demon. The Mechanicus postulated he was a lost STC, a weapon from the dark age of technology. The truth was simpler and stranger than any of them imagined. 3 sectors away, Inquisitor Matthias Cove received reports. He'd recovered from the penance stare, though his eyes remained haunted. He read the descriptions, studied the evidence, and slowly, carefully, he began to understand. This spirit wasn't chaos, wasn't Xenos. It was something from outside the galaxy entirely, operating on rules the Imperium didn't understand. That made it terrifying. But it also made it useful. Cove drafted a recommendation to his superiors. Not extermination. Observation. If this entity truly judged the guilty, perhaps it could be aimed, pointed at the Imperium's enemies,
turned into a weapon. The Inquisition approved his request. Ghost Rider was classified as contained anomaly, priority watch, non-engagement unless necessary. They would study him, learn from him, and eventually they would try to control him. Ghost Rider knew they would try. The spirit of vengeance felt their attention like a weight on his shoulders. But he also knew something they didn't. He'd toppled tyrants before, burned empires that thought themselves eternal, judged those who believed themselves above judgment. The Imperium would learn what Khorne already knew. The spirit of vengeance kneeled to no one. He rode toward the hive's upper levels, where the wealthy and powerful lived in luxury built on suffering, where corrupt nobles traded in slaves and genetic modification, where pleasure cults operated openly under the guise of entertainment, where the truly guilty hide behind laws and authority. The 41st millennium's elite are about to discover that hell has expanded its jurisdiction. And in the chapel, Sarah knelt before the crude emperor statue and prayed, not for herself, for the angel with the burning skull. She asked the God Emperor to protect him, to guide him, to keep him safe in his holy work. On distant Terra, the corpse god registered the prayer, felt the child's faith directed towards something other than himself. In any other case, he would have viewed this as heresy, a threat to his divine monopoly. But the Emperor remembered the spirit, remembered their moment of connection in the warp, remembered seeing a mirror of his own burden. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Emperor allowed another entity to exist in his domain without immediately planning its destruction. Not as ally, not as servant, but as Khorne balance. A force operating outside his control, but aligned loosely, imperfectly, with humanity's survival. The great game had a new player, one that refused to play by anyone's rules but his own. Ghost Rider reached the upper hive as dawn broke over Hive Tertius. The sun, a dim, polluted thing, barely visible through industrial smog, cast weak light across spires of marble and gold. Nobility walked clean streets, their augmetics gleaming, their clothes worth more than entire underhive sectors. None of them noticed the burning skeleton on the motorcycle until he was among them. Then they noticed. Oh, how they noticed.